Thank you. And I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker and bringing her into the spotlight. So welcome to Sue Piper from the Oakland Firesafe Council. And Sue, I'm going to take myself away and then I will get your slides up. So give me just a second.
Thank you. All right. Well, welcome everybody. And as soon as my slides get up here, I will dig right in. Okay, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to really talk about networking. First, who is the Oakland Firesafe Council? We are a community-based nonprofit. We were formed in 2014. Our members come from Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda County, and some from Contra Costa County. Our members are 1991 fire survivors, former members of Oakland's Wildfire Prevention Assessment District, wildland stewards who are adopt-a-spot stewards of Oakland, City of Oakland public lands in the wildland urban interface, representatives from homeowner associations, and individual wildfire advocates. Our meetings are open to the public. They are on Zoom. And at the end of my presentation, I will put in the links so that you can find out about these things. Our next meeting is coming up on November 17th. Normally our meetings are on Saturday. We're trying something different and it's going to be a Wednesday night. Okay, we can go to the next slide. We focus really on three things: education and outreach on wildfire prevention and disaster preparedness, and that's through our Oakland Community Preparedness and Response Program, which Doug is going to talk about. They provide tips and tools. They have 1-hour workshops. That is the website. We will plug it into the chat room, so if you can't write it down quickly, you'll have it. We also have the Gen Oak Radio Network, and Doug will tell you a little more about that. Last year, we ran a 5-part series called The Savvy Homeowner in our disaster-prone community, and all those 90-minute presentations, webinars have been recorded and they're up on our website. And coming soon in 2022, we will have a new one that's focused more on neighborhood preparedness rather than individual preparedness. We also have a weekly free e-newsletter with tips that are tied to what's happening this week in our community so that you can get prepared without being overwhelmed. They're just nice reminders. Okay, next one. You want to go to the next slide?
Yep, here it is.
Okay, the next thing that we focus on is advocacy. And we're unlike a lot of other wildfire prevention, other fire safe councils, because right now we don't do a lot of hands-on work, but we do advocacy. And one of our big projects is the East Bay Joint Powers Authority. The idea being that the fires know no jurisdiction, where we live. You know, Berkeley is near with East Bay Regional Parks. And if you live near Oakland, you're very close to Oakland. The fires go wherever the fuel is. And so we need to have a way for municipalities, the county, and some of our larger property owners like East Bay Regional Parks and UC Berkeley and Caltrans plan together so that they are creating what Caltrans calls watershed fire breaks or neighborhood fire breaks, that they have the same standards, that they're working together with a plan and possibly going after funding so they can actually make a difference regionally rather than just property by property. In Oakland, a few years ago, we were successful in getting the city council to make wildfire prevention a citywide priority. And out of that came an interdepartmental working group on wildfire prevention that consists of representatives from all of the city's departments. It isn't just the fire department's responsibility. And one of the big areas that they have made a great impact on is the Grizzly Peak Boulevard skyline overlook, where, you know, people go there, have always gone there because the view is great, particularly around the 4th of July. But when we were staying at home during COVID, it got really bad and people were drinking and shooting fireworks and whatever. So they work together, not only interdepartmentally, but with the other cities. They worked with City of Berkeley, City of Orinda, UC Berkeley, and East Bay Regional Parks to come up with a coordinated plan to reduce that kind of activity. And it was very successful. We are now focusing on evacuation as an issue with more development in the wildland urban interface. And you can read what our positions are on different issues if you go to our website. So that's oaklandfiresafecouncil.org. Next slide.
We're getting a request for a little slower pace.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure I get finished in my time. We also deal with support on hands-on projects. We don't actually do our own, but we support other ones. And so I talked about working with what I call the OWLs, the Oakland Wildland Stewards. These are volunteers who are officially Adopt a Spot people, volunteers with the City of Oakland's open space areas. So, you know, here are some examples of the broom pull along Montclair Railroad Trail and Shepherd Canyon, or volunteers who regularly work in Garber Park. And we help promote that activity. One really good thing about the Firesafe Council is we have a fabulous network of people, and we work it. When we send out messages, it goes to people who are on our mailing list with the understanding that they will pass it on to their listservs in their communities. And some of our members, as I said, are representatives of specific groups, and some are individuals. And Berkeley residents are welcome to join us, get on our list. You don't always have to come to our meetings, but when we pass a message out, we ask that you pass it on. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about lessons learned from my 30 years of wildfire prevention advocacy. My family lost our home in 1991, and my husband and I have dedicated the last 30 years to wildfire prevention. If you go along the 1324 corridor, you might see the Firestone Memorial Garden at the end of Highway 13, and you might see that funny looking structure on the way toward the Caldecott Tunnel that looks like a house that doesn't have a roof on it, which is the Gateway Emergency Preparedness Exhibit Center. My husband raised the money to build those gardens. The North Hills Community Association Garden Committee maintains them. They have been maintained by volunteers all these years. But what we have learned in that work and our work with the Firesafe Council is that life safety comes first. Your family, your friends, your neighbors' safety is most important. And everything else, including your possessions and your house, that's just stuff. It's hard to lose it, but it is replaceable. What isn't replaceable are your relationships and the people you love. And so that has to be what you think about. Next slide. And the second thing is that if you live in the wildland urban face, you must learn to live with wildfire year round. It has to be a daily part of your thinking. Defensible space and home hardening is not a once a year thing. It is constant because your plants grow and you have to constantly be concerned about making sure that embers are not going to get into your house. Firewise USA is a national certification program from the National Fire Protection Association. And Berkeley already has a few Firewise communities. Oakland is in the process of trying to get at least 10 of them. And the focus of Firewise is neighborhood preparedness, a couple of blocks rather than just individual homes. And then the last thing is that you need to take responsibility for knowing how to decide when you evacuate. You can't just wait for the city or the police department, who are the ones who are going to tell you to evacuate, to tell you it's mandatory, because where we live, it's too late. There was a study done a couple of years ago using 1991 data and Berkeley density, and they found that if people took 1.7 cars to evacuate, it would take 2 hours for the Berkeley residents to get off their hill. And if you think about the kind of fires that we see, they don't come from Orinda, they come from the ridge top. And when we have these hurricane force winds blowing the embers, it can come down the hill in 15 minutes. So by the time somebody notices that there's a fire and they do something about it, it's almost too late. So what we need to learn, we need to educate people so they feel comfortable with this, that when we hear red flag warnings, which are 72 hours before the conditions are going to get really bad, that's when you go around your house, make sure it's, the ember that you've made it as strong as you can make it, harden it as best as you can to keep embers from getting there. You've packed your go bag, you're ready to go. When you hear that it's a red flag watch, that means it's coming in 24 hours. That's when you start looking at the weather reports. East Bay Regional Park has online information from its remote weather stations that tell you the wind and the humidity and all sorts of stuff. You need to learn how to understand that information so that you can make the decision of, okay, now it's time for me to leave, even though they haven't said I should, because too many people are trying to get up our hills and there's not enough space for everybody, and you don't want to get caught in that. I was caught in that in 1991, and it was horrific. I don't want anybody to get caught in that. So the point is, if you choose to live here, you got to educate yourself. It's not something that just happens once in a while. It really has to be a part of your daily living. And if you do that, you'll be in good shape. And when you hear what Cheryl Drinkwater has to say and what Doug has to say, it all makes sense. And I believe that is all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Sue. Some of your personal experience, your professional experience, and your passion on this issue, which inspires a lot of people to get involved and get ready. And with that, Doug, I'm going to bring you up into the spotlight.
Thank you.
And welcome to Doug Mosher, also of the Oakland Firesafe Council.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you for inviting us to talk this evening. This is very much appreciated, and we enjoy this. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on our Oakland Community Preparedness and Response Program that Sue mentioned. This is something that we put together 3 years ago, the Firesafe Council, and we received a couple of grants to work on this. The reason we created this program was because at that time, 3 years ago, Oakland had no CERT training. Oakland had no core training, which was Oakland's version of CERT at the time. So there was nothing for the city of Oakland for people to receive any sort of emergency preparedness training. So we put our program together, and it's a little bit different, and I'll explain it very quickly. So what is Oakland Community Preparedness and Response? Besides a mouthful, we call it OCP&R. It's a community program, provides education. We have 1-hour workshops, we have materials, we have support to increase disaster preparedness, and that's for everyone. And we do a lot of outreach. Here we are presenting or tabling at a public library in Oakland. In addition to our workshops that we give to neighborhood groups and organizations throughout the city, and really to anyone outside of Oakland, not just inside of Oakland. We really just want to get the word out on things that people should do to be prepared for wildfire, earthquake, or any other disaster. And it does really complement CERT training. So what does our program cover? Well, we cover the most important steps that everyone needs to take, we feel, and many others feel, to be prepared for a wildfire, earthquake, and so on. And the sort of 5 steps in general, there they are: get alerts and notifications, understand what's going on, understand what to do from authorities, having your family emergency plan put together so that you know, for example, many different ways out of your neighborhood. If you had to evacuate, you have a list of items to take, you have your out of area emergency contact, and so on. Understanding evacuations, what to do during an evacuation, how to prepare before, and then what to do during. Zone Haven, if you've not heard of that yet, that's the mechanism by which Alameda County and our city's fire and police departments will perform either evacuations or shelter-in-place orders. And if you don't know your Zone Haven zone, please go to community.zonehaven.com. We'll put all these links in the chat afterwards, and put your address in, and you'll see what zone you're in. Additional steps to take include building your go bags and stay boxes. I'm sure everybody's heard of those. And really, first and foremost, is being able to help each other. And I know that's what Berkeley Mutual Aid does, and that's fantastic. And it's really so important to be in a position to help not only your family, but your neighbors and friends during and after a disaster. And then we provide a lot more. We have information on power outages, preparing for smoke preparation, communications. We have information on landscaping for wildfire safety and so on. We call that hardening against wildfire, as well as earthquake, and responding during a disaster, and then safety after disaster. So we cover a lot more than just those 5 steps, but really we encourage everyone to at least take those initial steps to prepare. Everything we have is online. That's our website. And we have what we call guides. You can go, this is our website, a front page. It's very simple. If you click on the guides tab, we have 24 different guides. Each one's on a specific topic. They're front and back one page. You can read those online. You can print those out. And they just have a lot of detail on topics such as creating your emergency plan, or personal family preparedness before a disaster, or organizing your neighborhood. And then, as Sue mentioned, we have our newsletters. Please go to our website. You can click on that button in the center and sign up for our more or less weekly newsletters on a variety of topics around preparedness. In terms of preparing, this is very basic and simple. I think everyone understands this. You organize and prepare before, you respond during, and you recover after an emergency. But the important thing is, really, everyone needs to do this work and organize and get prepared before an emergency, because when the ground is shaking or a wildfire is approaching, it's way too late to be prepared. So you need to do that now. And then there's also this concept that we respond first, we being you and I, all of us here, or as CERT says, we are the help until help arrives. And we know that there are a lot of us being residents of Berkeley and Oakland. There are far fewer firefighters and police and first responders, and they're going to be very busy and engaged in a major disaster. So we need to be able to fend for ourselves. And to do that, we really need to be prepared. However, most of us are not first responder professionals. Some of you may be firefighters, police, and so on. And so we do need to know the limits of what we can do, and certainly not put ourselves in any danger while we are helping others. So I just wanted to have some final thoughts. Take preparedness steps one at a time. I know it's human nature when you see a list of things to do, to get prepared for something that you don't know when it may happen, although it's a matter of when, not if, especially with a major earthquake. But just take the steps one at a time, break them down, set yourself goals, and you'll get through it. And remember that anything you do, you're better off than before. So reading a guide, looking for information online, creating your go bag, each step you take, you're better off than before, you're better prepared. So certainly take a look at our information, and there's a lot of great information out there. Berkeley BDPNN has great information on their site. Listos, California, if you Google them, they have fantastic information, great materials. PG&E, FEMA's ready.gov. So there's a lot of great information out there, and it's all very consistent. And finally, if your friends and neighbors haven't prepared, certainly encourage them to do so, because we are all in this together. And if you have any questions at any time, certainly reach out to us. We can provide a workshop if you like for folks in your neighborhood or within your organization. There's our contact information. Again, we'll drop these links into the chat. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Doug. I just want to share one thing. I'm so appreciative of you two, Doug, you and Sue, coming here from the Oakland Firesafe Council, because I think sometimes it's pretty easy for us in preparedness to get very siloed into our information, and the fires and earthquakes don't recognize city boundaries. And I appreciate how the Oakland Firesafe Council opens all this information to everyone in Alameda County and is offering this to us. For folks who are wondering, wow, that was a lot of resources, I didn't pick up on all that. We are going to share all these resources with you in the next day or two. We'll be sending it to the email that you got your Eventbrite, that you registered with on Eventbrite. So we will send you resource lists and links and copies of the slide decks. So if you're writing madly, you can relax. We are going to take care of all that. And Doug gave us such a perfect segue to our third panelist. I want to welcome Cheryl Drinkwater, who is an expert in home hardening and has a lot of specifics and professional wisdom to bring to this conversation and to move us into talking about what are the actions that we can start to take individually, and also really importantly together, to make our neighborhoods safer. So welcome, Cheryl, and I'm going to bring you up on the spotlight.
Hello, can everybody see that? I take that as a yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you, Susan, for inviting me to speak to Berkeley Mutual Aid, and I feel like I'm in good company with Sue and Doug. I did do a presentation for Oakland Firesafe Council earlier this year, and that is kind of my big home hardening presentation. This presentation is a little shorter and kind of focused on some new ideas that I'm trying to share with people, so you are my first audience. I'll just start. Besides being a registered architect, I am also a volunteer safety assessor with the State Office of Emergency Services. So along with other related professionals, we assess buildings after disasters to determine if they can be safely occupied. And I have been able to do that twice, and it was a really profound experience for me to assess buildings after these major wildfires. Whoops, there we go. So we don't need to stress this enough. Life safety is most important. Even with a hardened home, be prepared, have situational awareness, and evacuate early. Wildfires are inevitable, and does that mean that a wildland-urban interface fire disaster is inevitable? Yes, but fire research has shown that homeowners can create ignition-resistant homes to prevent community wildfire disasters. So our current situation is changing, and we do have to change our behavior. Our old ways are not going to work anymore, so we're kind of adapting. And so my home hardening presentation talks a lot about those features that you know, the different elements of your house and what you want to change. But the big thing that we're at risk of is embers. So the research shows that your home is most likely going to be affected by these flying embers or firebrands, and they can travel. Home ignitions result from conditions local to a home. Those home vulnerabilities in relation to nearby burning materials, which are often other homes, principally determine those home ignitions. This area of the home is now kind of known as the home ignition zone. And this image on the right is actually a laboratory that is based in South Carolina. It's operated by the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And they do all this research in this huge warehouse. They build full-scale homes, and then they just hit them with these fire cannons and then study the results. And you can see all of this stuff online. So I won't get into all the elements of home hardening in this presentation, but there are so many resource guides out there. This is just a list from IBHS, the Institute for Business and Home Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. This is kind of a focusing on a pre-evacuation checklist. So it's related to your home, but also about evacuating. And then we have, of course, Oakland Community Preparedness and Response. Doug talked about the guides. These guides are really great. There's a bunch of them. This one I'm just showing the assessment checklist. And again, you're going to get links to all of this. This is about what you do to plan your, your improvements to your home. And a lot of it is just vegetation and cleaning up. And then others are more, full scale retrofits to your home, new roof. So our homes can be an emotional topic. Home maintenance and fire risk. How ready are you to take action? Why doesn't everyone do enough? You hear all these things, right? It costs too much. I can't do it myself. I don't have time. There's no deadline. My neighbor isn't doing anything. Can any of you relate to this? But you can take action to give your property the best chance. Reduce your risk and make small to large changes to reduce hazards. Get to know and work with your neighbors. Get everyone on board. All ages and abilities have something to offer. It's similar to the COVID vaccine, yes, limited value if only a few people do it. And I just wanted to point out these two images on the right. These are from a paper that Jack Cohen, who is one of the scientists who've been doing all that home hardening research. The top image is Coffey Park in Santa Rosa. We all know about this as kind of the urban conflagration. This was structure to structure fire spread. So the fuels were the houses themselves, all close together. This is kind of a situation we are familiar with in the Berkeley Hills. This bottom image, on the other hand, is kind of, an ignition resistant house. Somebody did all the work, but they're in a low density area, in Colorado in this case, and after a high intensity wildfire. And they survive. A lot of the vegetation is burnt. So it's just kind of interesting, these two different conditions. Here is the zones that we've all heard about, the home ignition zone being zone 1. This is basically Berkeley's property conditions. Most of us have no more than 5 feet or sometimes less to the property line of your neighbor. So we are dealing with a tight swath that we have to protect. So now the second half of this quick talk is about working with your neighbors. And, some people find this very challenging. You do kind of have to go out of your comfort zone. But I've got 5 things here that I'm kind of looking at. Some of them are very established. Others are just an idea. So these are ways to approach working with your neighbors. And so the first one is using or implementing the incident command system. This is called ICS. This is what governments and FEMA, everybody, nonprofits, people who are kind of like big corporate, Red Cross, use the incident command system to just organize after a disaster event. It helps them get, everybody has their role. And then create a skills inventory database for your neighborhood. Create a Firewise group, get certified. Firewise was mentioned earlier. Group small projects together to be more attractive to a contractor or handyman. And this actually happened. I was asked, I can't get a contractor to work on my project to install some vents, that kind of thing. Cost share program. So Diablo Firesafe Council, of which I'm a board member, we are kind of our special thing is this cost share program, and that's for vegetation removal. And I'm going to talk about all of these in the next few slides. So the ICS system that I mentioned, this is from the FEMA website. It's kind of like who does what. So you sometimes have a leader in your neighborhood, somebody who always gets everybody to do everything, who's really, motivated. It's broken down. These are just the main categories: operations section, planning section, logistics section, finance. So everybody gets a job, and hopefully this can help you. If you didn't know where to start, this helps you kind of just break it down into smaller pieces. And I was in a recent training, and the trainer was even saying, you can use this to even do fundraisers and plan other events. Create a skills inventory using a shared database. So you could use Google Docs, for example, and just kind of create some columns, skills, family, skills, equipment, if anyone has any special equipment like a generator, how many CERT classes they've taken, special needs. And then the Firewise program we were just talking about. This is like a recognition program. You get certified. You just gather a few neighbors together. I don't know what the recommendation is, maybe, 4 to 8 houses, maybe a whole block. And you just have to meet some very modest requirements every year. One of them being they call it an action plan. So you have to have goals, and hopefully you're implementing them. So you can learn more about that. Grouping the smaller retrofit projects together to create a larger project. This example that I wanted to show was about the crawl space vents that really happened. And I suggested to this person, if you can't find somebody to do the work because the job is too small, go and ask a few of your neighbors if they would be interested in doing the retrofit as well. And then that bigger project may be more attractive to a contractor or a handy person. And this could be I just used these two examples. We have foundation vents and gable vents. And of course, when hiring anybody to do work on your home, there are recommended tips. This is also heavily online, but interview them to make sure they're the right person for the job. Ask for a written proposal and a payment arrangement. Ask if they have a business license or liability insurance if applicable, and if they have the experience to do the job. Ask for references. The last is the cost share assistance program. Again, creating a small group of projects. This one would be for vegetation, cutting back shrubs and trimming trees. Diablo Firesafe Council applies for grants, and so we receive funding periodically, and sometimes this funding has to be spent. Sometimes you're on a waiting list, but I invite you to take a look at the application and get some neighbors together and apply. So hopefully this is helpful in helping you to make a plan, and you have all these options. Remember, everyone shares in the responsibility. And of course, we have more resources. We're all full of those tonight, and these will also be sent to you, and or we can put them in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can also email me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I think also those last 2 points that you made about how neighbors can work together are things that are new to, at least to me, in the discussions that we've been having in the community, is thinking about how to, just like we did with gas shutoff valves, a lot of neighborhoods did that we can do that about other kinds of projects, and then also banding together to ask for grants. I think that's possibly new to other folks in the room tonight, not just to me. So thank you for that. So I want to open up the floor for questions. You can put them in chat and Dave and I will bring them forward, or you can raise your hand and we'll have you come off mute and ask the question directly. We had a question about percentage of Hills residents signed up for AC Alert. I'm trying to find out if we can get an answer to that question. But any other questions, comments, things you're interested in knowing about?
I saw somebody put something in about how large an area needs to be a fire-wise community. And you have to have a minimum of 8 people, members. And the requirement is really pretty simple. You come up with an assessment of what you need to do. So sometimes it's just on your own properties, but if you happen to have other property that is in your neighborhood, you add that to it. You come up with a plan. It has to be approved by your fire department. And then you have a 3-year plan to address it. And all that's required for the members of this Firewise community is to give 1 hour of time a year per household. Well, I mean, if you just attend this meeting, that's already counted to it. So the thing is, you just keep track of either the meetings you attend or how much you've spent on vegetation management, whether you hire a contractor or you do it yourself. And then whoever is your leader of your Firewise group reports it to this National Fire Protection Association. We will all far exceed the requirement, and it allows you to continue your certification to the next year.
Thank you, Sue, for filling that in. Cheryl, there's a question if you would share your email address in the chat, if you'd be willing to do that. And Craig, I see your hand if you want to come off mute.
Yeah, hi. Hey, I had a question for Cheryl or anybody. Actually, does anybody have any information about like window films? You know, I understand that the windows are kind of a major entry point for embers or whatnot. And, you know, the cost of putting double insulated or tempered glass, et cetera, can be pretty prohibitive. Are there any types of, you know, coatings or films that might be applicable for keeping the glass at least intact? It may break, but it would stay, you know, viable.
I guess I should take that. You know, the films would probably melt if they were exposed to heat, but the requirement for folks in the hills, if you are replacing your windows, is to use double pane tempered glass. And it doesn't make it fireproof, but it buys you time. Even there's actually a recent study, I mean, even in a fire with dual pane glass, that first layer of glass could break. But it's tempered, so it's not, you know, creating shards. It should be just kind of failing, and hopefully the second glass pane stays intact. But I can do some research and find out if there are any films. I haven't heard of any kind of films. It just doesn't seem like it would be robust enough, and it's certainly not part of the building code.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments bubbling up out there? And we have a question in the chat. Can you talk a bit about the gable filters? Cheryl, I have a feeling that's also for you.
Yeah, so gable vents, those gable vents, like the one I showed in that image, that is kind of an old venting detail for your roof. So most roofs are vented. You have eave vents, you have gable vents, which are the older style, you have ridge vents, and then you have just in the roof plane vents. But it has to do with the roof assembly and keeping your roof assembly and therefore your interior space healthy. You need airflow to keep things dry and not create mold. And so a gable vent is kind of like the old-fashioned vents. We don't usually install them any longer. Mostly it is eave vents and ridge vents and roof plane vents. And all of these vents, if they are a mesh, will need to be protected from an ember storm. So even though we need to have these vents, if we're going to have a vented roof, we need to protect our vents from embers entering the roof that way, or your crawl space. And so we put a mesh or we buy a specialized vent. So the gable vent is just, when you saw that in that photo, if you had one and you wanted to retrofit it, you could just add mesh to it, 1/8 inch square mesh. And that would be, something you'd need a few tools with. It's not totally complicated, but you have to be able to get up there. So that would be another aspect to that project.
Thank you. And I think this one is probably also for you, Cheryl. Are there any current requirements for home hardening pre-sales?
That is a very interesting question. There are laws being passed and they're not really in effect robustly yet, but there are some laws. I think AB 38 is one of them. I don't have that all right in front of me right now. That will start to, if a house goes on the market, they'll be looking for, proof of home hardening features on a home, if it's in the wildland urban interface or a fire zone. And there are other things like that. Vegetation is another one. Are you in compliance with your local jurisdiction? And I believe Oakland and, not Oakland, Orinda and Lafayette have already implemented that. So that's a changing thing, and a lot of that is online. But things are going to continually change, and the requirements will become stiffer. Sue knows a lot about this.
Well, I know that there was a hearing today I couldn't attend, but the Department of Insurance is coming out with a list of recommendations, maybe 10 things that people can do, and also the IBHS, which is the International, whatever it is, it's the place that had that picture with the house.
Yeah, Institute of Business and Home Safety.
The safety, which is an insurance sponsored research as to building materials that will strengthen homes for wildfires and hurricanes and other things. And they have come out with a list that is very similar. And the idea is that if the IBHS has come out with it, hopefully most of the insurance companies will all be consistent in saying the same things. And the other piece, which we haven't really talked about, but the reason the insurance department is behind this is that if we can get the 50 insurance companies writing insurance in the state of California to be consistent in what they see as the standards for hardening a home, that they will then look at individual homes and what you are doing for defensible space and home hardening, and not just going by a zip code in terms of writing their policies or canceling their policies, because we have a very serious problem with that. So I would think that in the next year, you will begin to see standardization of what those 10 things are that you can do. And some are cheap and some are more expensive. Some you may be required to do if you do $100,000 or more in renovating your house, because you got to bring it up to code. And eventually, I think some of these things will be in the code. But it doesn't hurt to stay on top of the best practices and to do as much as you can.
And I would add to that, some of you may have seen the article recently, I think it was in SF Gate, about somebody's insurance being canceled because of the empty lot across the street, and the owner isn't managing the vegetation. And so they see that as a risk they don't want to take with your neighbor's property. So they have, a risk assessor come by your property and sees your neighbor's property isn't taken care of, and then your insurance is at risk. So thought I'd mention that since I just talked about working with neighbors.
Yeah, that's all the reason, more reason to do fire-wise communities. You work together, put some pressure on that absentee land owner.
That's right, because sometimes it's easier to work with neighbors than other, and maybe there are ways we can support each other
Yes.
in the more challenging ones. I've got a question here about, can you recommend a source for suitable landscaping plants? Like, is bamboo a fire hazard? And what's, relatively speaking, fireproof or less hazardous?
Well, on our website, the Oakland Firesafe Council website, and also on Oakland CP&R, there is information about developing a fire-wise landscaping. And we have a 90-minute presentation by Marilyn Sarney about that. The truth is, all plants will burn. So yes, there's some things that are more flammable than others. You don't want to have oily plants. And you don't want to have plants with very fine needles because, they burn more quickly. But more important is the spacing of your plants, the maintenance of your plants, and the hydration of your plants. And you have to think about, when you talk about maintenance, if it takes a lot of maintenance, maybe it's not worth having that plant. Maybe you should remove that plant and put something in that's a little less intense, that's also more fire safe. And I think we need to change our thinking about landscaping. I mean, I come from the East, and so my vision of what a beautiful garden looks like is an English garden with lots of plants around the foundation. Well, you can't do that when you live here. This is just, it's not safe. So it doesn't mean it has to be cactus and everything. No, it just means that you have to pick plants that are less flammable. You make sure there's space between them, below them, above them if they're under a tree, between you and the house, and you've got to be watching it because they grow all the time. So that's why you have to go out more than once a year to prune them back.
And did we mention maintenance?
Yes, maintenance.
Did we mention maintenance? Yes.
Maintenance.
You probably don't want to have some of these plants right up against your house.
Yeah, I think bamboo might not be the best.
That I think, just like when we're doing CERT trainings, we talk about water. I think when we're talking about fire safety for our homes, we're talking maintenance. Yes. That is the drum. I had two questions that seem related to me, which are about if you're clearing your yard, should you replace wooden fences with metal? And also, is there a treated wood that's particularly good to use for fences or decks?
Okay, as far as the wooden fences versus metal, so the recommendation is, you can still have a wooden fence, but for the first leg of fence up to about 5 feet or more, you do not want that to be attached to your house, or that is a good place to put a metal fence where it's 0 to 5 from the house, so that you don't have a fuel attached to your house that is, vulnerable to embers. And so you could do a whole fence in metal, or you could, if you really wanted to have a wood fence, just have a metal fence where it comes right up to your house. So the 0 to 5 feet is a pretty good one, and there's a lot of literature on that. And then as far as treated wood, we do have pressure treated wood, which has some properties. It can still burn, but it is a little bit more robust, and we use that a lot for framing of decks and fences, also because it resists rot a little bit more. There are also ways to build decks that are ignition resistant. You can use metal framing. They also have deck boards that are not going to be as ignition, vulnerable. They're not, I wouldn't say they're resistant to burning, but they're a little bit more robust. And there's a lot of materials that have to be approved by the state fire marshal. So that's, if you're planning to do a deck or fence and you really want to be hardened, there's a lot of literature on that. But yeah, that would be something that you would want to design into your construction documents and permit.
Thank you. I'm going to throw the mic to Dave for a moment, just to remind everyone in the community about the Go Kits from BDPNN. since we're talking about preparedness.
Yeah, just a quick note to say that BDPNN has a great program, which is free Go Kits for seniors and people with disabilities who live or work in Berkeley. And I'm going to put the link in the chat, but we'll also include it in the mailings that go out to you. We've gone through a lot. We got 1,750 of these, and we've already distributed something like 1,300. So we're getting down toward the end. So now, if you haven't done it yet, now's the time. But I would also ask if you know other people who fall into that category, please, it's a great way. First of all, it's a great way to start the conversation, right? So if you know someone who fits that category and you want to connect with them about, as a neighborhood, preparing for disaster, you can say there's this amazing program, and it's an offering rather than saying like, hey, trim your bushes. It's a little bit more of that sort of neighborly support. So people always ask us, what age senior, what kind of disabilities? I live just on the other side of the Berkeley border. So the first thing I want to say is, we don't define what a senior is. You get to do that on your own. And we don't get into defining what a disability is. You get to do that on your own. And we don't ask you your address. So it's pretty freewheeling. We really want to recommend, we really just want these Go Kits to be a great way to begin thinking about an overall disaster prep plan and ways to connect with the people around you. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. And as we're headed towards the top of the hour, I just want to leave a moment if there's any last questions. You can cogitate on that, but I'd just say that Berkeley Mutual Aid is a community organization, and we always need volunteers, and that's how new projects come about. People come on in and have ideas to do things and how we can better support the community. So if you have questions for us, if there's something that you need help and support from your community from, contact us, or if you're ready to volunteer, contact us. And so we're info@berkeleymutualaid.org. We'll get one of us to respond. And let's see, we've got 2 questions in under the wire. And that first one, it's a great question about how can the Hillside Fire Safety Group work with Berkeley Mutual Aid. I think I'd love to talk with you about that and see what we could do. So if you would send us an email at that info address, we could arrange a time to have a conversation about how we can do that work to continue building fire safety in our community. And then a question from Peter: are there zoning rules against raised seam steel roofs?
Let me read that again. Where's that question?
Right before the end, Peter Hess. Are there zoning rules?
Are there zoning rules against, oh, it keeps moving, against raised seam? Okay, so standing seam metal roof, I think is what you're mentioning. Metal roofs are actually a great roof material to have for the WU. If you live in the wildland urban interface, it is non-combustible. However, it does need to meet the requirements of the code, which it must be Class A. And sometimes the metal roofing, you need to talk to a roofer to tell them, I live here, I need a robust metal roof. And so it's usually about the assembly. It'll have probably plywood, most roofs are framed with plywood, but it may have plywood, it may have other layers to help with the entire assembly so that it meets the Class A requirement. But metal roofs themselves are really great for fire areas. And you will see them if you ever drive up in, say, the Gold Rush country. There are a lot of metal roofs.
Thank you. It sounds like that experience. Peter's just sharing that the loss of the home in Santa Rosa that was re-roofed in steel and then re-roofed in steel.
Yeah, I mean, it's great if you can afford to do it. It's a little bit more, it's probably somewhere between 25 and 50% more than a asphalt comp shingle roof. But you never have to replace it.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for being part of our community and showing up as part of these discussions to make our community safer. Thank you, Doug and Sue and Cheryl, for your sharing your time and expertise and being a resource for all of us as we sometimes leap to preparedness and sometimes stumble to preparedness, that we feel like we do have a network with information that we can reach out to. Dave, I'm going to ask that you and I both save the chat so we don't lose any resources on our way to creating that document.
Will do.
And we will be sending, like I mentioned, we will be sending you in the next couple days through the address you registered for, all the things and that we can. And if we miss anything, you've got our address, info@berkeleymutualaid.org. So with that, we're going to say thank you so much and have a great rest of your evening. And may we enjoy a lot more rains in this season. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And Dave, I actually can't save the chat, so I'm just going to rely on you to save the chat.
Done.